Imagine standing at the edge of a cold, misty cave, its entrance dark, foreboding, silent. The only sound is your own breath echoing against stone walls carved by time. Now imagine stepping inside, torch in hand, and discovering bones. Not just scattered animal remains, but carefully arranged human skeletons, sometimes of children, sometimes of young women. Their positioning isn't random, it's deliberate, ritualistic. Welcome to the Paleolithic world, where life and death were deeply intertwined with forces humans could barely understand. And in that fragile balance, sacrifice emerged as a chilling sacred act. Thousands of years ago, before the invention of writing, agriculture, or even the wheel, our ancestors were already telling stories through carvings, through burial rites, and yes, through blood. The idea of sacrifice might sound brutal to us today, but in the Paleolithic mind, it wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. It was communication. It was survival. Archaeologists once believed that early human societies were relatively peaceful. Their lives centered around hunting, gathering, and surviving the elements. But as research evolved, a darker layer began to surface, one filled with mysterious death pits, mass graves, and haunting traces of ceremonial violence. Not every burial was a celebration of life. Some, it seems, were carefully orchestrated offerings. Take the case of the Goughs cave in Somerset, England. Excavations uncovered human bones bearing unmistakable cut marks. These weren't just signs of butchering for food. They told a more unsettling story. Skulls were shaped into cups. Bones were broken, marrow extracted, not just for nutrition, but perhaps as part of a ritual. Was this cannibalism for survival? Maybe. But the patterns suggest something more. Symbolic. A transformation of flesh into something sacred, even powerful. And it's not just one cave. In the Czech Republic, the burial site at Dolní Věstonice reveals bodies placed with care, sometimes covered in red ochre, a substance associated with blood, life force, and rebirth. One grave contained the remains of 3 young individuals, positioned in a curious arrangement, their bodies touching in death, their eyes facing different directions. Was it a family? A tragedy? Or something more intentional, perhaps 3 chosen ones, offered up to whatever god or spirit governed their harsh world? We'll never know for sure, of course. But the patterns repeat across continents and cultures. Strange burials, unusual artifacts, and signs of ritual activity. They hint at a belief system. One where death wasn't just an end, it was a transaction. Give something to the spirits, and maybe they'd grant you luck on the hunt. Or fertility. Or protection from disease. And what could be more powerful to offer than human life? This isn't to say that every ancient society practiced human sacrifice, but those that did seem to have shared common themes: fear, reverence, and a desperate need for control in an unpredictable world. Nature, in the Paleolithic era, was unforgiving. A failed hunt could mean starvation. A sudden illness could wipe out a family. These weren't just inconveniences. They were existential threats. And when prayers weren't enough, when rituals of song and fire fell silent, perhaps the blade was all that remained. Consider what it meant to be chosen. Were the victims outcasts, captives, or volunteers? That question haunts researchers. In some later cultures, like the Maya or the Inca, sacrificial victims were sometimes revered, treated as holy messengers. It's possible Paleolithic people held similar views. To be sacrificed might have been seen not as a punishment, but as an honor. A tragic, awe-inspiring gift to the divine. And still, we're left with more questions than answers. Paleolithic humans didn't leave behind written explanations. All we have are bones, ashes, tools, and cave paintings. But these fragments tell us something crucial. Early humans weren't just brutes surviving day to day. They were thinkers, feelers, believers. They looked at death and tried to make sense of it. And sometimes, in that search for meaning, they turned to rituals so powerful, so terrifying, they echo across time to this very moment. Because when you strip away the modern world, our science, our technology, our comforts, what remains is that primal fear, that desperate hope, that desire to connect with something greater than ourselves, even if it costs us everything. And in the flickering torchlight of ancient caves, we begin to see those fears made real. Now, let's walk deeper into that cave, not just physically, but mentally. Imagine being part of a tribe huddled together as the cold winds howl outside, food stores running low, illness creeping in like a shadow. In that moment, fear becomes tangible. Not fear of a predator you can see, but of invisible forces that seem to toy with your fate. And in that ancient world, how do you fight what you cannot touch? How do you bargain with the unseen? You offer a life. This wasn't done with cruelty or carelessness. If anything, what we uncover suggests that ritual sacrifice was often accompanied by a deep sense of reverence. A sacred ceremony. The earth was not just a place to walk, it was a spirit, a giver of life, and sometimes a taker. Early humans didn't separate themselves from nature. They were embedded in it, and when things went wrong, they believed they had broken a cosmic balance. The only way to fix it? Restore harmony through offering. In Eastern Europe, sites like Kostenki in Russia and Sangir tell stories in bones and ochre. At Sangir, the burial of a child just 10 years old is especially striking. The body was covered in thousands of ivory beads, laid to rest with intricate spears and animal carvings. This wasn't a burial of poverty or neglect. It was a display of immense effort and spiritual meaning. Some scholars suggest this child may have been part of a ritualistic role, perhaps even sacrificed or chosen in a rite few today could ever truly understand. But it's not just about isolated burials. It's the repeating symbols that tie these acts together, the positioning of bodies, the use of red ochre, the inclusion of broken weapons or pierced bones. These weren't random deaths. They were orchestrated, sometimes theatrical. And more than that, they were often public. We tend to imagine Paleolithic humans as private, isolated, afraid to share their thoughts. But their rituals suggest the opposite. Ritual sacrifice was likely communal. Everyone witnessed it. Everyone took part. It was a collective expression of grief, hope, and submission to forces beyond their control. And perhaps most chilling of all, it may have worked in their eyes. If the hunt succeeded afterward, if the illness receded, if a child was born healthy, these weren't coincidences. They were proof. Proof that the offering had been accepted. There's also another layer one that speaks to the power dynamics of the time. While most Paleolithic groups are believed to have been relatively egalitarian, ritual power may have still existed. The role of the shaman, the spiritual guide, would have been critical. They didn't just interpret the will of the spirits, they directed the rituals. And that could mean deciding who lived and who died. Imagine the weight of that decision. Or perhaps the seduction of it. A small community could rally behind a charismatic shaman, believing in their visions, their wisdom. And when times grew desperate, it might have been the shaman who declared, an offering must be made. Whether that offering was a volunteer, a captured outsider, or someone born into a certain destiny, we may never know. But what's clear is that these acts shaped the very core of early human society. And even today, echoes of that past still resonate. Think of the myths passed down for millennia, stories of gods demanding sacrifices, of heroes giving their lives, of blood spilled to save a village or ensure a good harvest. These aren't just tales from the Bronze Age or the Iron Age. Their roots go deeper, much deeper. all the way back to the flickering fires of the Paleolithic night. What does that tell us? That sacrifice, real, physical, sometimes brutal, was embedded in the DNA of human belief from the very beginning. Before temples, before altars, before scriptures, there was the cave, the fire, the fear, and the offering. But here's the haunting part. This wasn't madness. It wasn't evil. It was meaning-making. In a world that offered no explanations, sacrifice gave our ancestors control, however fleeting. It allowed them to believe they could alter fate, that through death they could protect life. And perhaps that's the most profound paradox of all, that in giving up what they valued most in another human being, they found hope. It's a difficult truth to accept, especially through the lens of modern morality. But understanding it doesn't mean condoning it. It means honoring the complexity of early human minds. They weren't monsters. They were survivors, dreamers, thinkers. And their rituals, as harrowing as they seem, were born from love, fear, desperation, and the search for answers in a silent universe. And if we listen closely, those answers might still whisper through the bones. Step back now and picture the scene not from the outside, but from within. You are part of this Paleolithic community, your body wrapped in furs, your breath visible in the frozen air. You've seen hardship. You've buried loved ones. You've watched animals vanish from hunting grounds and felt the sting of hunger crawl through your gut. In this moment, the world feels indifferent, perhaps even hostile. And as the shaman lifts their arms and chants into the smoke-filled night, everyone around you waits in stillness. The sacrifice is not just a death. It's a prayer carved into flesh. For modern minds, it's tempting to distance ourselves from such acts, to see them as savage relics of a primitive past. But the deeper we look into our origins, the more we see just how universal the desire to make meaning from suffering really is. In Paleolithic culture, sacrifice wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a system one that viewed the world as a living, breathing entity. Mountains, rivers, animals, even the stars above, they all had spirits, wills, and moods. And when those forces turned against you, you had to act. Some evidence even suggests that sacrifices may have coincided with celestial events, eclipses, solstices, the movement of constellations. Early humans were keen observers of the sky, and they likely believed that aligning their rituals with these cosmic cycles could increase the power of their offering. It wasn't random, it was timed, rehearsed, and loaded with spiritual gravity. They weren't just offering life. They were sensing their actions with the rhythm of the universe. There's a site in modern-day Turkey known as Göbekli Tepe, built much later than the Paleolithic era, but likely informed by older traditions. Its massive stone pillars, some over 10 tons, are arranged in circles and decorated with images of wild animals. It's widely believed to have been a ritual center, a place of spiritual gatherings. While we don't have direct evidence of human sacrifice there, what we do see is an immense investment of labor and belief, likely passed down from the kinds of practices we've been exploring. And this is where the story takes an even more haunting turn. Because sacrifice didn't vanish with the Paleolithic, it evolved. As humans settled, formed villages, and created agriculture, their belief systems became more complex, but the idea of sacrifice stayed. It found new shapes. In some Neolithic cultures, people were buried beneath homes, possibly to bless the structure. In others, victims were offered during the building of large monuments. Blood was still seen as sacred currency, one that could bind the physical world with the spiritual. So what began in shadowy caves beneath the ancient sky would ripple outward for millennia, shaping rituals across every continent. The Paleolithic didn't invent sacrifice, it discovered it. It laid the groundwork for a spiritual logic that would dominate human culture for centuries. that life must sometimes be given to ensure life. And even though we now live in a world guided by science and reason, the echoes haven't fully faded. We still talk about sacrifice in our language, our myths, our media. Soldiers sacrificing themselves for their country. Parents sacrificing dreams for their children. Lovers sacrificing everything for one another. It's no longer literal death, but the idea, the emotional weight of it, still lingers. Still moves us. Why? Because deep down, perhaps we all feel what our Paleolithic ancestors felt, that the things we love most are fragile. That we live in a world we don't fully control. And when faced with uncertainty, humans don't just adapt, we create meaning. Even if that meaning comes with a price. Of course, not all sacrifices were bloody. Some involved offerings of food, fire, or objects of beauty. But those paler rituals were often born from the same roots as their darker cousins. They were still about giving something up, something valuable, to appease the unknown. To find balance again. What makes the Paleolithic rituals so chilling is not just their violence. It's their humanity. These weren't random acts of barbarism. They were acts of belief, of hope, and sometimes possibly of love. And that complicates how we see them. It forces us to step back and ask harder questions about what people are willing to do when they're desperate, when they're scared, when they believe with all their heart that they're doing what's right. And maybe that's the real haunting truth, that the line between horror and honor is thinner than we'd like to admit. So the next time you hear the word sacrifice, whether in a movie, a story, or a conversation, remember where it comes from. Remember the caves, the bones, the flickering flames. Remember the people who stood in the cold, whispering to the stars, believing that blood could speak for them. And ask yourself, what would you give if the world around you began to unravel? If this story gave you chills or made you think differently about the past, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions in the comments. What do you believe drove these ancient people to such extremes? And how do we carry those beliefs with us today? If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the forgotten chapters of human history. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, sometimes the darkest truths reveal the brightest insights.